think we're ready. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to an exceptional panel in these very exceptional days. A rich and comprehensive document entitled "We Choose Abundant Life," describing and analyzing the situation and the hopes of the Christians of the Middle East, was published a couple of months ago. And it got many people talking. It was released online, printed in booklet form, presented in youth clubs and in parish meetings, and was reviewed by many theologians worldwide. The topic concerns us here at Nest and relates to much of what we teach and discuss. And so we are glad that one of the authors of this document, Father Rafael Zareb, has agreed to introduce us and guide us through it. Father Zareb is a parish priest at St. Maroon's Church in Haret Sakhr in Juni. He has a PhD in systematic theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. He is a professor of theology at St. Joseph University of Beirut, in Sagesse University, and the Holy Spirit University of Kaslik. He is the national director of the Pontifical Mission Society in Lebanon and was newly appointed as an advisor to the Maronite Youth Office. Thank you and welcome among us, Father Zareb. Also, we were interested to hear from a theologian outside the author's circle, and we wanted to hear an opinion and comments on the text from somebody else. So with us to do this is Father Bulus Wehbi. He's a parish priest of the St. Michael's and Gabriel Orthodox Church in Mazra in Beirut, a lecturer at several universities, most recently senior lecturer in the Faculty of Humanities at the NDU, Notre Dame University. He taught religion, sociology, anthropology, and cultural studies. He is the co-coordinator of the Joint Christian Education Committee in Lebanon, responsible for issuing a unified Christian catechism in 11 books. He is active in the ecumenical and the Christian-Muslim dialogue. Another engagement with the text is also coming from within Nest, from our own faculty, and to do this is Dr. Johnny Awad, the Associate Professor of New Testament here. We look forward to hearing from all three of you, starting with Father Zareb. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Brothers and sisters, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Rima, for your introduction. Thank you, Father Dr. Sabra, for inviting me to this panel. And I want to talk about the document and especially the background of this document, We Choose Abundant Life. You know that the background is especially the persistent political, security, social, and economical turmoil with its impact on the Christian presence in the Middle East, especially on two levels. The first of all, the ecclesial identity and the service of mission. And second, especially the model of conviviality with Muslims and Jews in the Middle East. You know that a group of ecumenical theologians and experts from the Middle East, they called themselves, and I'm part of it, We Choose Abundant Life, with reference to Deuteronomy 30:19b. We tried to give answers to these two main questions, especially in this difficult context in the Middle East. We Choose Abundant Life is an outcome of a dynamic and a consultative 3 years process undertaken by this group of experts and belonging to different churches. I would like to talk about 5 main points. First of all, the initial methodology of the process, because it has changed during the journey. Second, I will talk about the challenges and methodological options of the document, an analytical and critical approach of the current situation, the main choices for a prophetic presence in the Middle East, and some perspectives for the future. You know, the initial project of We Choose Abundant Life came up from two different initiatives. First of all, to write a document on the meaning of the Christian presence in the Middle East, and it was undertaken by the MECC, first of all. And then the second document was called The Path of the Monastery, to give a say for the churches about the geopolitical situation of the Christians in the Middle East. What we have done, and to try to combine into in a same document called Kairos Middle East Towards Churches Global Compact. Well, when you read this title, first of all, the problem is Kairos Middle East. But for us, the problem wasn't Kairos Middle East. It was, you know, Churches Global Compact. Why Churches Global Compact? Churches Global Compact because we wanted to adopt the Global Compact methodology used by the United Nations, especially inviting the churches to align strategies, operations with theological and geopolitical principles, and to take actions to improve the ecclesial and social goals for the churches. And that's why we tried to call it like that. But the reasons behind that is, you know, because, you know, we have many challenges in the Middle East, and the churches, as well as the ecumenical organizations, they are reactive before these challenges, and they are not proactive and well informed, especially because of many different challenges. What are these challenges? First of all, the challenges of the churches in the Middle East are, first of all, ecclesial and theological renewal. Second, ecumenism. What kind of synodality we can live despite theological and doctrinal canonical differences. Third, conviviality with Jews and Muslims. What kind of conviviality based on shared experiences and spiritual solidarity. And fourth, the geopolitical context and the contribution of the churches to human rights, citizenship, prosperity, and lasting and just peace. What was the methodology of this Kairos Middle East Towards Churches Global Compact? It was divided into 4 phases. First of all, the constitution of the reference manual on these 4 topics, 4 challenges that I have mentioned. Second, the constitution of experts groups, specific selective of criteria taking into consideration the ecumenical representation, gender parity, the diversity of the countries, and the academic formation, as well as pastoral engagement, because academic is not only the main issue. And the third one is, you know, starting to draft this text, but after all, and this what we are aiming to do after that is, you know, a consultation with the international partners as well as with the church members to welcome all the critics, all the inputs or the comments from the churches. What are the challenges? The challenges, you know, from on this document. You know that many challenges we have faced in this document. First of all, the revolution, and second, the pandemic. But facing these 2 challenges with resilience and with adaptation, continual adaptation, they gave us, you know, new methods of achieving our goals. But upon the, we can say, upon the change in the Middle East Council of Churches, we had different point of views with the MECC, and some of the experts from which have participated to these consultations, we decided to continue this process on our own and not to engage the churches in such an endeavor, which is a little bit, you know, critical for the churches during these moments. what are the main, main point of divergence? I could say like that. First of all, the atmosphere of the consultations were marked by frankness and freedom. And this a little bit was an issue. And second, it was the inductive method, because some churches still prefer the deductive method, and it was an option, methodological option, especially when we choose that we have to take the contextual theology as a methodology for our document. I hope my English is okay. Excellent. Okay, thank you. This is my first time. So the approach was analytical and with scientific rigor, and we tried to apply this on the, first of all, on the geopolitical situation, using all the humanities such as history, social science, and cultural anthropology, and at the same time to apply the historical critical methodology on the text of the Bible, and to avoid all kind of fundamentalist reading of the Bible. These are the options of the document, and we tried to keep this balance between the geopolitical context and the theological context. And if we lose this balance between these two things, we can lose all the document. This on one side. On the other side, we tried to keep the balance at the same time between the diversity of the churches and the complexity of the national and cultural context that frame the presence of the Christians in the Middle East. We didn't go into details about the nations, because we think that it can come after that from the churches itself and from different countries. And I think this is a good option as well, to try to keep the balance between the two things. And one thing is very important, and it was for me very important, is the contribution of around 100 experts, because we organized 4 consultations in presence before the pandemic, and 2 through video conference with Muslim scholars and Jewish scholars from the diaspora. So this contribution was very important for us. A small analytical and critical approach to the current situation. You know that the document explores the geopolitical context in which the Christians live. First of all, we have pluralism. Pluralism is at the same time richness, but at the same time is a permanent fragility because of the risk of division and confrontation between the churches. That's why we have to take into consideration this element, and it was very critical, because all the churches exalt their past, but they don't engage into the present, and they don't see at the same time that this pluralism is at the same time a fragility if we don't work together. Second, citizenship, because of the tribalism, feudalism, nationalism. It was kind of impeding the Arab Spring, or the Arab Spring failed to establish the citizenship based on freedom and equality of all citizens, regardless of their religious and ethnic affiliation. That's why we warn the Christians against coalition between minorities, because it will harm their mission in the society. At the same time, it's a call from the authors towards a new social contract to protect human values, dialogue, and human fraternity in this transition period of our history. Third, unity despite diversity, because it is a major issue in the region. Ecumenism, it's a matter of life and death. So that's why we have to go through a synodality, which means to walk together through an apprenticeship to togetherness and witness. This is another issue as well. The third one is the inner reform of the churches to be able to talk with the contemporary culture. And the inner reform is very important to eradicate favoritism, nepotism, and corruption in the churches. But we don't have to forget the role of the Christians in the society, but at the same time, we don't have to exaggerate the discourse about the role of the Christians in the society, because they are first of all and after all citizens as well, the same as others. To continue this mission, the churches has to renew their theological discourse and to engage especially women and young people in the mission of the church and in society. What are the main choices? Okay, good. The main choices for for a prophetic and dynamic presence, first of all, I want to classify them like that. On the intra-ecclesial level, to revive the spirit of synodality and consultation, because like that, the life of the church will echo the dynamics of the gospel and will be prophetic, especially in the society. On the inter-ecclesial level, the commitment of the MECC, because MECC is still the main ecumenical body between the different churches, and especially to adopt an ecumenical plan of collaboration between the different faculty of theology in the Middle East for the benefit of the future formation of the future pastors and the lay people. Third, on the theological level, to adopt a contextual theology both at national and regional levels to renew their theological and ecclesiastical discourse in line with modern day circumstances. The document outlines as well to move towards a culture of dialogue with Muslims and Jews and to avoid all kind of polemics and exclusion of other Christians in theology. On the interreligious level, to open a new page of relations with Jews, away from the European approach through the paradigm of the Holocaust, and to defend especially the rights of the Palestinians. But at the same time, on the Muslim or Christian-Muslim dialogue, to abandon the doublespeak, the hypocritical courtesy, and purely elitist attitude with Muslims, and to go through a foundational discourse based on promotion of human dignity and promotion of societies. The fifth level, on the political, economic, and social level, to adopt policies which are respectful of human values, human rights, and to be involved and to give the opportunity of women and young people to be engaged in the ecclesiastical institutions and society, and to reject all kind of protection of religious minorities, all kind of minority alliance, and to detach from dictatorial and political regimes. On the cultural level, to reinvent Arabism as an inclusive and cultural space, and a special attention to the reception of the displaced persons and refugees with reference to the human fraternity, but at the same time with respect for the welcoming societies. Perspectives for the future. I can say that this document is not the final step. For us, this document is the first step towards a discussion, and a dialogue with different parts of the society, but especially with the church, and a renewed call for the churches to be committed to live together without fear and without hesitation. And the greatest challenge that is postured by the vision of the We Choose Abundant Life is to suggest not only to Christians, but to all citizens to be engaged and to live and to work for the good of the society. And at least I can say that the well-being of one's community, which is very important in the Middle East, has to be balanced with the independent individual, and like that we can negotiate a new kind, of relationship between the freedom of the person and the well-being of the society in the Middle East, and all that for the well-being of the human being considered as the glory of God, because Jesus came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot there to discuss, and I'm going to give the floor to Father Boulos. Johnny? Okay. Little change of plan. I don't know how this is going to get there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me first begin by thanking the ecumenical group of women and men, lay and clergy, theologians and other specialists for undertaking the initiative to put together this historic document at this historic moment that our region is experiencing. We Choose Abundant Life is a well-written document with a vision to a sustainable Christian presence and witness in the Middle East, and a more effective Christian participation in the development of Middle Eastern societies. It's a document that is worth discussing, debating, contemplating, reflecting upon, and also critiquing. And though the document's primary concern is to address contemporary challenges facing Middle Eastern Christians on all levels, nonetheless, I believe, and this is the claim that I wish to make in this short response, the document is trying to address the old, new question of the identity of Middle Eastern Christians. Who are Middle Eastern Christians, and who should they be? In sketching the political context of Christians in the Middle East, the document makes it clear that the religious, cultural, and ethnic diversity that once characterized the Middle East and under which Middle Eastern Christians lived for centuries was, quote, fatally wounded, end of quote. Instead, sectarianism became the identity marker of Middle Eastern societies. Experience of Middle Eastern Christians, argues the document, unveil this shift from an open, diverse world to a sectarian, closed world. The experience of Middle Eastern Christians under the protection of Islam, the Dhimmi people, have intensified their perceptions as a threatened minority. And ever since, they lived suffering from this complex. The failure of the Arab Renaissance as a modernist approach or project to which Middle Eastern Christians had contributed immensely, and whose outcome, had it succeeded, should have laid the foundations of the modern democratic state. The failure of that Arab Spring led to a retreat to religious, sectarian, ethnic, or tribal categories as the components or primary components by which Middle Eastern Christians identified themselves. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War II, the colonial policy of divide and rule did not only fail to create civil states where religious and ethnic diversities are well managed, but also led to communities each seeking the outside protection of a colonial power. The leading role that some Middle Eastern Christian intellectuals undertook to overcome the minority complex or the majority/minority divide, or the search for protection from outside by advocating ideological parties of Arab or Syrian nationalism, has led to the emergence of dictatorial and repressive regimes that were detrimental to the notions of freedom, democracy, and social justice. With every experience Christians had, sectarianism was being confirmed and deepened. And in recent years, says the document, the Sunni-Shiite conflict, represented by the rise of the Wilayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurist, in Iran, and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, has had a, quote, devastating role, end of quote, in leading the entire region towards further deepening of sectarian and religious fanaticism. All these historical experiences have not only shaped the present sectarian character of Middle Eastern societies in general, but also Middle Eastern Christian identity and mindset. So who are Middle Eastern Christians? And who should they be? To further clarify my question, allow me to personalize it. Who am I as Johnny Awad? What are the main components that constitute my identity? How do I identify myself? Does the sectarian character of the society in which I was born guide me towards identifying myself first as a Protestant, second as a Christian, third as a Lebanese, and fourth as an Arab? Or am I a different configuration of these components with perhaps less or more components? These are the types of questions, I believe, existential questions of identity, that this document is wrestling with and trying to respond to at a deeper level. The document does envision a configuration of components to the identity of Middle Eastern Christians that liberates them from a minority complex, or the need to seek the alliance of minorities, or to seek protection from outside, that is likely to ensure a sustainable, dignified presence for them, one that strengthens their sense of belonging to the societies they live in, one that keeps them rooted in their homelands, and one that has a potential to stimulate their active participation in the renewal and the development of the societies they live in. Who should Middle Eastern Christians be? Who should I be? The answer proposed by the document is the following. I am first an Arab. Second, a citizen of the country of Lebanon. Third, a Christian. Fourth, a Protestant. The order of identity components envisioned by the document reverses the order that a sectarian mindset is likely to produce. Instead of a Protestant, Christian, Lebanese, Arab, Arab, Lebanese, Christian, Protestant. It moves away from starting with the particular, and instead it starts with what is wider, larger, inclusive, and common. Not only that, the document also envisions what these identity components or these wider spaces should become, or should become so as to provide sustainability to Christian active and effective presence that is capable of promoting a culture of life and not a culture of death. Now, to these components, I shall now turn. The first component that should mark Middle Eastern Christians' identity is Arabism. It is my claim that this component receives very special attention and has a special significance in the document, and so becomes the umbrella component under which other components must be placed. Arabism is here identified as, quote, a cultural space and an inclusive cultural concept, end of quote. To confirm this view of mine, here are some quotations from different places in the document. The Middle Eastern Christians, says the document, are not newcomers to the Arab environment, nor strangers in it. Following the rise of Islam, they played a pioneering cultural role by translating the sciences of their time, especially philosophy and medicine, from Greek and Syriac and Arabic, to Arabic. They made Arabic a language able to accommodate all branches of knowledge by coining philosophical, theological, and scientific terms. They have been contributors to Arab civilization, here reference to the Arab Renaissance, and to its rich cultural diversity, regardless whether they were Armenians, Syriac, Aramaic, Coptic, or Greek. The Christian heritage preserved in Arabic is a common legacy, says the document, for all churches in the Middle East, considering the profound role of the Arabic language and Arab culture in our common witness. This emphasis on Arabism as a cultural space and an inclusive concept, and as the first defining component of Middle Eastern Christians' identity, is further strengthened when one looks at some strategic junctures in the document. It is not a coincidence that the document's analysis of the geopolitical context of Middle Eastern Christians begins, and after a very short introduction, with the Arab Renaissance, and its emphasis on the principle of reason, and as a principle that is general and common among human beings, that was able to transcend the particularities of religion, sect, race, color, and would have been the backbone of the modern democratic state and the foundation of the idea of citizenship. Despite its admission to its failure as a modernist project, the document introduces the Arab Spring as the cornerstone of Middle Eastern Christians' geopolitical context and experience. The reader of the document cannot miss the nostalgic feelings throughout the document for this Arab Renaissance. It is not an exaggeration to make the claim that We Choose Abundant Life is really an attempt to revive and contemporize the spirit of the Arab Renaissance. It is not a coincidence also that the starting point in chapter 2 for the document's analysis of the challenges of the present and stakes for the future is the Arab Spring, which is depicted as announcing a new world that has begun but has not yet been shaped. It is a new world because it has shown its ability to transcend barriers of religion, confession, race, gender, and generational divide, with a longing for social justice, desire for civil rights, and especially freedom. This new world, unfortunately, has been demonized and neutralized. Its momentum to lead to true democratic societies has been disrupted, and it is uncertain whether it will lead to a genuine reform in Middle Eastern societies. However, the spirit of the Arab Spring continues to resonate throughout the document. Let me give you an example. The document's repeated appeal for the churches in the Middle East to allow young people and women their active participation and involvement in the life and the decision-making circles of the churches is modeled after the dynamic participation of young people and women in the demonstrations of the Arab Spring and the new mindset that the Arab Spring has charged Arab societies with. But to salvage Arabism from being, as a cultural space and an inclusive cultural concept, from being lost or abused or distorted, to make it more convivial to Middle Eastern Christians, the document calls upon Muslims and Christians to together dialogue for reinventing this space and concept by freeing it from misleading ambiguities that has linked Arabism as a cultural concept exclusively to Islam. Arabism as a cultural space and an inclusive concept is therefore the first component of Middle Eastern Christians' identity. The Arabism envisioned here is rooted in the Arab Renaissance and the Arab Spring, and not in what Arabism was before the shift to sectarianism took place in Middle Eastern societies. And just as Christians had a distinguishable role in the Arab Renaissance and the formation of cultural Arabism, this cultural space is inclusive enough, wide enough, that they can come in and reclaim that component as the major component of their identity, revive their role as they actively participate in the new world that has begun but has not yet been shaped. Here I cannot but think of the following questions. What are the ingredients that make Arabism a cultural space and an inclusive cultural concept? Is the Arabic language what makes this space inclusive? And therefore, this space is a linguistic one more than anything else? Are there other ingredients in this space? What are they? How can Middle Eastern Christians of Armenian or Syriac backgrounds identify with this cultural space? Are they simply called to participate in it and not necessarily to reclaim it as their own? And if so, what configuration of identity components will they have? Will their identity components be like me, like mine, or they will be completely different? Will this cultural space remain inclusive and stand the test caused by the incursion of another cultural space represented by the expansion of Wilayat al-Faqih of Iran, especially in the societies where Christian presence is still most noticeable? Will it stand the test? I'm running out of time. 2 minutes? Following Arabism as the first component of Middle Eastern Christian identity is the national component. And in my case, it is the Lebanese component. Here again, the document has a vision of what the political structures that the Arab Middle Eastern states should have or should become, inspired by the Arab Spring movements which exposed the deficiencies in the political, economic, cultural structures, showed the gap, exposed the gap between people and their rulers, etc., 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 etc. The document is guided by the Arab Spring to promote the idea of the civil state as an alternative political structure to the already existing structures, with the concept of citizenship that acknowledges and respects differences. The document argues that the uprisings of the Arab Spring have challenged the concepts of minority-majority in the name of citizenship based on individual rights, and called for citizenship to be at the center of political practice and a beacon for political social reform. Now, unfortunately, the Arab Spring revolutions has not succeeded in changing the changing the status quo of things in the Middle East. And so the document issues a call for Christians and Muslims to engage in a dialogue about establishing the idea of the civil state that is marked with good management of diversity, etc., etc. I'm trying to move quickly here. The failure of the Arab Spring to create tangible changes in Middle Eastern societies shows that sectarianism and sectarian mindset, sectarian instincts, as well as systems of dictatorial, ideological, theocratic, and feudal bent, are still stronger than the civil ones. The civil state and its concept of citizenship are the product of a long journey of civil education that has not yet started in this part of the world. And here one cannot but wonder whether there will be any Christians left in the Middle East by the time this education takes root in Middle Eastern societies. The third component is the Christian component, and this is where the document puts a lot of emphasis, which is through the concept of synodality, of life together, walking together. Christians are called to walk together with one another, and to actually demonstrate that walking together through visual unity. Visual unity. You have to demonstrate that. People have to see that. And here they call for the revival of the Middle East Council of Churches as a platform that demonstrates this visual unity of synodal or synodality of walking together as Christians. And the last component, I'm cutting down on things. The last component is the sectarian component of my identity, that is being a Protestant. This component is not discussed or contemplated upon in detail by the document, but one can still read between the lines. And although the document's character and nature are clearly anti-sectarian, the document is anti-sectarian in its character and nature. Though this is the case, nevertheless, this sectarian component of identity can still be seen in a positive way, in that it contributes to the diversity and the richness of the wider, inclusive, and common spaces of Arabism, a civil state, and a synodal Christianity. Paragraph 31 describes that diversity beginning with the patristic times until the arrival of Roman Catholic and Protestant missions, and the marks of richness each has left on the renewal and development of societies through the schools, universities, social medical centers they established, as well as the direct or indirect contribution that each had to the rise of the Arab Renaissance. Again, the Arab Renaissance. The sectarian component is encouraged by the document to freely express itself, to freely celebrate its particularity, as long as it is not the starting component through which Middle Eastern Christians identify themselves. One can be the Protestant, the Orthodox, the Catholic one wants to be, but only after they are culturally belonging to a culture and inclusive concept of Arabism after they are citizens of a civil state and after they have synodal orientation. Only then you can be who you want to be. Particularities must not overshadow what is common, wider, and larger. This is how We Choose Abundant Life envisions the identity of Middle Eastern Christians, but in a new world that has begun but has not yet been shaped. I hope I did not misrepresent the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnny, for your very comprehensive answer on this subject of identity. And now we look forward to hearing from you, Father.
Good evening. First, I would like to thank my friend Dr. George Sabra for inviting me to participate in this panel, and Reverend Rima for being our orchestrator today. And I hope that this document will be of benefit to everyone who reads it. I encourage all of you to get a copy of it and to read it if you have not already done so. It gives me great pleasure to be among the panelists discussing this important document, which carries the title of We Choose Life, We Choose Abundant Life, and which combines description, analysis, and a view towards a roadmap. Allow me first to call this document a semi-constitution, which oscillates between pain and hope, optimistic in pursuit, and sailing in several theological, societal, and political spheres, which its hopes are progressive, as its title signifies, in analytical unison. And even though this document aspires to look ahead and hopes to break out of the present, it posits a multifaceted call towards coming together for the sake of clarifying vision and devising the beginning of solutions. It seems to me as though the persons who composed it, who worked together towards composing it, worked like a one who is orchestrating what we call a marionette, you know, where a person holds several threads and makes the doll move together. It seems to me like the persons who composed it worked on it like one who is orchestrating a marionette show, where each thread or sphere moves in harmony with the other, to bring out of their different specializations and experiences a document that has to be taken as a whole, so that one part cannot be comprehended apart from the other. An effort that was not easy at all, for the document to exhibit unity of style and analytical depth. This document spans the beginnings towards what lies ahead for the Christians of the Middle East, concentrating on the reality they have reached to as a result of the amalgam of these factors, which contained many difficulties, many challenges, and many failures, as well as many successes and achievements. But though it seems ambitious in pursuit, it is clear in putting fingers on the wounds and scars which have afflicted the ailing body. What I liked in it is its mixture and mixing of the micro and macro levels. It goes into the dynamics of the parish, as well as the respective church this parish belongs to go towards a unison of vision that should permeate work among the churches as a whole, as well in all the constituents that are in these churches. And as it goes to the roots and spans the path that was to come, which the Christians treaded in the Middle East and stayed in the Middle East and remained in it, it focuses on what they did to remain in the Middle East and contribute to what have transpired as a result. They were able to contribute towards consolidating their effect and shine in the endeavors that they were intrinsic in them, like the Renaissance of the late 19th and 20th century, which they contributed in with their fellow Muslims. And even though this Renaissance has faded, even though their presence has dwindled, this Renaissance remained in spirit and echoed in the minds of many, as it does even today, and it still resonates hopes of what we aspire to come. Even though this document admits variety as a cultural pattern and insists on its necessity, the necessity of variety, it nevertheless tries to probe the institutional viruses that have affected the churches, which they unfortunately succumbed to. As a result of this, the document oscillates between description and analysis, and has succeeded in highlighting the malady, trying to feel passages towards exiting this dark alley and stop the wounds from progressing. It warns from the danger of sinking towards the logic that many people consider to be, between parentheses, logic, of the majority and minority. It warns Christians not to feel that they are a minority in any country they are in, as well as in the Middle East as a whole. It stresses on citizenship rather than equality of citizenship, rather than the feeling of minority as a small portion within a bigger majority, highlighting the pivotal role of the Christians in epochs that have passed and which we hope will remain. How do we go forward? How to feel the light in the density of darkness in which the churches lay, and which still inhibits the minds of many in our area. What can we do that will take us out of this abyss? What can we do to exit this void from the minds as well as from the way of life of many? How can we induce people to exit this despair and perhaps look at a light that they cannot see yet? This document calls for harnessing the resources at hand, the abundant resources that the Christians and the churches have at hand, and the factors already available in order to rise. It calls for the contribution of youth and women in the lives of the churches, which unfortunately is very low at present. And it also calls the churches to listen to the voice of the people, to engage the people at large in what it calls collegial work and collegial responsibility within the respective churches and among the churches in unison. This applies to dealing with the Muslims as well, and this applies to dealing with the Muslims in avoidance of this feeling of minority vis-à-vis a majority. The feeling of belonging to a sect, in Arabic taifi, not the church, not belonging to the church, is totally devastating because it is in contradiction with the gospel. It is in contradiction with the very phenomenon of the church as the body of Christ. We are members of the church. We belong to the church. We don't belong to any sect. What makes this worse is that our churches still cling to outdated patterns and administrative structures and pietistic outlooks where the challenges necessitate a new approach even to the Bible and to tradition, employing the social sciences and technology in reaching out and opening a road ahead. This spills over into how the churches should see and should seek to employ the modern media in order to reach out and preach. The document calls to commitment to the causes of our people and our area, and it calls the churches to cooperate because each church cannot make it alone, and to devise new frameworks for that. I believe, and now I'm going outside the written text, I believe that the present ecumenical structures are not sufficient today. I believe that we should seek to devise new patterns, seeking to employ all the factors that I have posited ahead. These problematics should be discussed in our churches, in our universities, and in our institutions. Committees need to discuss the different sections of this document, and they should be discussed within a clear strategy and vision and practical steps in order for the Holy Spirit to resonate and to reignite its presence in all of us. Thank you very much.
Father Zareb, would you like to have, and do you have any reactions to the two panelists with you?
Well, I thank both of you for your different reading of the document. First of all, I totally agree with your reading of this document about the identity, and it reminds me a book of Amin Malouf, Les Entités Meurtrières, because we are living in a world with a complex identity. We carry with us different identities, and I think one of the identities that we carry as well is somehow a European identity, which comes from Europe, and that's why what we have started, especially in this process, is to engage as well the international partners, because either we call us Near East, Proche Orient, or I don't know, we adopted, the Middle East, but we are related to Europe, and we cannot detach our history from Europe at the same time. But we have to say something, because in this critical moment of our history, where the Middle East is, they are forming the Middle East in a different way, we have something to say about our future, and not to be passive, to be active as well, and to say something about our cultural identity in the Middle East.
We have some time for questions and comments. More? The other microphone. We have some questions time for questions. We will collect 3 to 4 questions and then see who from the panelists can best answer that or would like to answer it. So a microphone will be going around to those raising their hands. Hassan, please. Yes. Could you just introduce yourself first?
Hello, I'm Shadi. Or our social political interests as Christians, as a community living in a society like other religious groups. So for me, this document, in a way or another, helped me to answer what does it mean to be a Christian. And the analysis comes as a fruit of this question. It's not a critique, but I hope that it was clarified, because this is what I got from the document. Because our conflicts, for me, this is the fundamental question between the churches, comes from this. And the other question is, what does it mean to be a church? Is it a group that has a certain interests, economic, political, social interests, or we are the followers of Jesus Christ? So clarifying this, which comes first, is also very important for us in the Middle East and maybe in the world. And to end my intervention, I would like to see this clarified more if there is more intervention in the future, because the layer of faith for me was very prophetic and very clear in the document. And when we say prophetic, I remember the prophets of the Old Testament who declared that our God is a living Lord. So, and this is maybe a sign of hope for me when I hear these vibes in the document, because many positions are very courageous in this document, and for me it comes from a spiritual source, not from political interests or social interests that our group needs in these circumstances. So, as a recommendation or as a question, did I understand well the document, the spiritual background of the document? This is one. And two, I would like to hear a reaction on this. Thank you.
Other questions? In the front. Also, please introduce yourself in the beginning.
My name is Jason Casper. I'm with Christianity Today. Thank you. It was a very good explanation from everyone from the document. I learned a lot today. But one point of curiosity with something that was only mentioned briefly would be where the divergence came with the Middle East Council of Churches. What is it that led to the separation of this effort and your decision to move in your own as a group, as apart from the institutional body?
One more question.
Farid Khouri from Middle East University. My question has a socio-political aspect and historical. In the 11th century, the Crusaders, in an attempt to save Jerusalem, they destroyed Constantinople. How do we see today the quarrel between Protestantism and the Catholic Church? Is it like a revenge from the Protestant, quote-unquote, ruled West to empty or to avenge the Middle East, to empty it from its Christianity? And how could this be prevented by the Eastern churches, whether Maronite, Catholic, Orthodox, in cooperation with the Protestantism and the cooperation between the two?
Kill the Protestants.
Okay, I think we can maybe start by answering these questions. The first question by Mr. Matar, would you like to answer that, because you're in that concerns involved?
Well, I think, first of all, that this endeavor in this document came up from what I have called not a reactive to the challenges, but to be proactive. And what has driven us to do this is our faith, especially the common witness. And I think this is one of the most thing that has driven us to go further with this document. And we have faced a lot of challenges. And I can tell you that we have started from zero, and we continue with zero resources to do this thing. I think what has driven us is really our faith, our theological engagement, and a prophetical word for our society, and not only a spiritual one. It's not a spiritualizing discourse, like, you know, how to escape from reality. And that's what has driven us to do something that has an impact in our society. Because we have noticed that Christians have lost any impact in the society. That's why we went further with this document. And I think the element of faith, you know, is very important for us. But faith has to be incarnated into something in society, in cultural options, in geopolitical options, into strategies. We cannot do something very detached from our reality. And this is a very important thing, I think. But the discourse about different identities, I don't know if we have to, you know, to put them in order, but I can see that in this kind of reading, I can find myself as well as an author of this document. But what is behind that is faith. That's what we have noticed in this. And what is interesting in this document, and what I have noticed, for example, that what joins me with Protestants, with Orthodox, is much more than what divides me. And I can tell you, for example, working with, you know, reverend women from the Protestant church was a discovery for me, but it was amazing. And what amazing, okay, I'm a Catholic and I'm still a Catholic. Okay, it's very, very new for me, but the witness for Jesus Christ is much important than these divisions. And that's what we have felt in the consultations, in writing this document, and in the relationships between different pastors, what do you call pastors? Pastors. And it was a very fruitful experience for all of us. And we want to spread this experience to as much as we can, especially the young generation, and especially with women in the churches. And that's what we are. It's not about, you know, kill the Protestants or, you know, yes, it's a joke. But I can tell you that it's not a discovery, but it was a very, very enriching. And especially when you see these women, how much they love Jesus Christ and they want to put it into action. And that's what is important in this document, I think, personally.
There was a question about the separation of the two paths, parting ways with NECC.
Okay.
And also, Father, we would
Okay.
like to also answer that question.
Well, the divergence, I think, I put, you know, two main issues. First of all, when they saw that there was very frank and open dialogue with experts, they were afraid. But what the text, I think, wasn't very harmful for the churches. It's not harmful, but it's prophetic. You know, if we are theologians, we have to be prophetic at the same time. We cannot wait for the churches to accept all these things to write something. We have to be prophetic. This is the charisma of the theologians. They have at the same time to say the truth, but well connected with listening to the sensus fidei, or what we call sensus fidei, the sense of faith of the faithful. And this is the work, this is the vocation of the theologians. If we abandon this, then we will be submitted to the structures of the churches. We have to think a little bit out of the box to give a push for the church to go forward. If we don't do that, we will abandon our vocation. And first of all that, and the second is the contextual theology. You know that this methodology is not accepted. The churches, they are fine, and they will accept the deductive methodology. And you can see, if I tell you, for example, as a Catholic, to convince my students to go through practical theology or contextual theology, it's impossible, sometimes impossible. But this is the prophetic, we have to read and to analyze our context.
I'm starting on that. What is wrong with contextual theology when you use churches?
They don't accept this kind of theology,
What do they view as deductive? What is their methodology?
Dogmatic. That's the deductive.
Just to clarify, when you say they, you mean church hierarchies,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And some more input on this.
I just want to address your question very briefly. I have been associated with the Middle East Council of Churches since the mid-70s as a young man in the university. And I have seen how the MECC has progressed. I don't want to go into the reasons that led to the, I would not say downfall, but maybe partial demise of the MECC, but there is a feeling among many higher members of the hierarchy in the churches, and I am not at liberty to say who, because I heard this from their own mouths, that they are not as enthusiastic today about the Middle East Council of Churches as a body that combines the churches as it was at the time of inception and early development. Which is why now I feel that the MECC is called to search for a new role for itself, maybe different from the role that it used to play in the old times, because the churches partially succeeded in forging relationships among themselves and patterns of cooperation and what have you. And some feel that perhaps they can maybe do away with the presence of the MECC, which is why I'm saying now, with the resurgence of the Middle East Council of Churches, and excuse me if anyone disagrees with what I'm saying, but I feel that it now should be in the process of rethinking its role and how it should be a body that combines somehow the churches in a different way than what it used to do. I would just, if you allow me to comment on what you said about the Crusaders. Now, I disagree with you that the Crusaders came to liberate Jerusalem, but that is an object of debate.
This was the title.
That's an object of debate. And I think you mixed some factors within your questions that were not compatible with each other, like the fall of Constantinople with Jerusalem and whatever it is. Now, of course, this is a very tricky question, but I feel that the Crusaders, I mean, if you read the book of Amin Ma'louf, Les Croisades comme vues par les Arabes, Crusaders as viewed by the Arabs, I feel that we are now going into a new way of analyzing why the Crusaders took place. I mean, I don't want to go into detail about that, but I just needed to comment briefly on what you said. Thank you.
Dr. Johnny, do you have any comments on this questions?
No, not really.
Floor is open again for a collection of more questions. And the microphone, if you could to the lady there. Introduce yourself, please.
From this document, you're at the same time proposing that they should be taking a leading role in synodality and consultation and the unity that you're talking about. Do you have any propositions or suggestions on how you're going to include and get them to see the light that's been shed through this document? How are you getting them to come into dialogue with you to discuss contextual theology as an important aspect of how to deal with the conflicts we have today, from a Christian point of view, but also as a society and as Arabism and everything else. Thank you.
There was another hand, Dr. Ford.
Peter Ford. I teach Islamic studies here at Nest, but I speak as someone who in the past has lived and worked in the Gulf. And I just want to address the, one of the aims of the document is to call for a reinvention of Arabism to include as a cultural space for all Christians living in the Middle East. Now, Dr. Awad raised, I think, the legitimate question, okay, what about Christians who identify as Armenian or Syriac? But there's also this whole realm of Christians in the Gulf. They may not be citizens, but they're gaining recognition by the states where they live as a viable part of the culture there. They are Middle East Christians. Many of them are second and third generation, especially those from going back far enough, Asian background and so forth. I don't see them identifying at all with this sense of Arabism. If you're going to reinvent the cultural space, is it going to be necessary to actually reinvent the term itself that is exclusive to the term Arab? I think this is also a challenge for MECC, which is, as far as I can see, is not really given due consideration to Christians in the Gulf.
Other questions? Comments? Okay, so we try to address these two questions then. Again, I think it's just to go back to you.
Well, with the MECC, we tried until the last moment, but they didn't accept. So we tried. Okay. With the MECC, we tried until the last moment to convince them to go forward with this process, but we couldn't succeed. And even at the launching of the document, we invited all the member churches and the MECC Secretary General to the launching of this document, because we are open to dialogue with the MECC, and we are still open, and we will try to find ways to, I don't say include, but to give them this responsibility to go forward in this in this endeavor. But as Father Wahbe was saying, and we said it, I think, in the document, the MECC has to revise all the strategies, all the mission, vision behind the MECCs to be much more active in the ecumenical dialogue and on the as an ecumenical platform. But
something has to catalyze that.
What?
Something has to catalyze that.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that thing that has to catalyze it?
Well, we will always try to make an initiative toward this. And we did it. And we are open to this dialogue. But sometimes, you have to think out of the box, sometimes out of the structures of the church, to give them a kind of push. Because if we are tranquil in our structures, we will not move forward. And that's what's happening with all our churches. Sometimes we need a kind of, something to give them the opportunity to go forward with different things. And I can tell you that in our work, even though if we did all these things, the MECC will not be engaged, or the churches will not be engaged in some responsibility, because it was a kind of research, and we explained this many times, but we couldn't succeed.
May I say something? I think change is I think any attempt to change will face a lot of difficulties, but I think the courage about this document is that it has been issued. And that's a very important step. I am reminded by your question by what Paul the Apostle does in Romans 11. He's discussing there why historical Israel did not believe the gospel. And he ponders, and he doesn't want the Gentile believers to look down at Israel, or historical Israel, or unbelieving Israel. And he says something like this: my mission to the Gentiles is not only for the salvation of the Gentiles, but also for the salvation of those who did not believe from Israel. How? Through a ministry of jealousy. When they see Gentiles accepting the gospel, they will become jealous and then probably embrace the gospel. And therefore, his ministry is to the Gentiles is an indirect ministry to unbelieving Jews. You asked about catalyst. I think what we are doing today is a catalyst in the ministry of jealousy. And I think other activities around this topic will create a new atmosphere in the churches, I believe, and also in the circles of the Middle East Council of Churches. There will be a moment where the church leadership cannot keep itself, or keep its eyes closed or blind about this topic. That's the importance of activities like this, in which you are participating.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is 7 o'clock already, and I know that I myself have still a lot of questions, and would like to hear more. Maybe this conversation can continue later as well, but for now we have to close, and we have to thank the 3 panelists for your presentations, for stimulating our minds, for starting this conversation. Particularly, I would like to thank Father Boulus, who quickly translated his intervention from Arabic to English while we were talking. So thank you very much for this quick reaction. And let's give everybody a hand and continue afterwards with coffee and tea.
A quick question. Can we have a copy of the video of this panel?
Yeah, it will be on